exceptions to the rule, and you're always going to have those outliers and people being treated a certain way. I mean, you see it now with the black community and minorities and the underprivileged communities and all things of that nature. But at the end of the day, I mean, people are still living comparatively better than others, which doesn't really mean much if not everybody's getting treated the same. And kind of with that being said, I kind of want to bring it back home and talk about Senator Martha McSally. I kind of found this article when it kind of came up as a notification on my phone, and apparently she's the first woman in the Air Force to fly in combat, and she reported that she'd been raped by a superior officer while serving, and those actions kind of almost led her to quit the military, and that was about 18 years ago. So you gotta think 18 years ago, they didn't have, I mean, granted, just like you said, the first woman to fly in combat. 18 years ago, they weren't allowed to do that. If you saw, spoiler alert, if you guys saw Captain Marvel, you'll see why some women weren't even allowed to fly in combat. But regardless of that, she ultimately decided to stick it out and be the voice within the ranks for women, and in the House, now in the Senate. She's a senator. So the reason she kind of decided to share her experience was because another senator from another state, I forget what state it was, kind of also spoke out and said she was a survivor of a sexual assault. And she said, in quote, "We are survivors together." And that's why that's kind of why I chose the story, because it's things like that where women are now feeling, I mean, what you can see with the Me Too movement, they are more empowered to speak up and say things rather than, coming from the military. You can, there's some women who use that as their, to their advantage. And it gets really muddied up when other women falsely claim sexual assault. And it kind of doesn't make their, cry for help valid because of the murky waters with all that stuff. But with that being said, to have a senator actually speaking out 18 years after all that happened, it just speaks volumes to what's going on in the country.
Yeah, I think so. And I was reading about her story too, and I believe, if I read correctly, or remember correctly, she wanted to share out as well, because for her, like, let's say, that happened, and when it happened, she could have easily reported it at that time. And because of when it happened, she maybe wouldn't have finished her time there or been treated differently, because there wasn't so much help at that time, or there wasn't enough people listening, like you said, So I think of her being able to do that, even if it was now 50 years from now or whenever, the fact that she just spoke out. There's women in the Air Force or in other military branches that are probably being sexually assaulted, and they're scared because who are their higher ups? Probably men who aren't going to listen to them. And they're just there to do a job, regardless if they're a woman or not. Like, a lot of, especially minorities that join the military, they're there because they can't afford to go to college. And what better way to do that than to fight for your country? And then knowing that you're about to fight for your country and then getting raped or sexually assaulted or any of the above, like, you just can't win, right? You're trying. It's not like, I kind of have to suck this up because I'm here surrounded by men and I should know better. When I went to college, I cannot tell you how many times we had meetings about how to protect ourselves from getting raped on my college campus. So I was 5 hours away from my home, right? I barely knew anyone. Actually, I only knew my roommate that we went to high school together. And I was having this discussion with you, like, we had rape whistles and things like that. It's like, instead of having classes about the guys not raping us, it was more like, hey, we know that this is a thing, so we're going to teach you how to protect yourself. We want you to yell. We had like this thing called Envy, like end violence type of thing, which I think is great. I think it brought a lot of women together. I mean, I was part of this group called I Am That Girl, and it kind of made it a safe place for us to speak about those things. But you could imagine the majority of this group was there because why? Because they were assaulted. And it's like, it just blows my mind, because you have to create these places, like, instead of teaching the bully not to bully, you teach how not to get bullied. It's so backwards.
It starts that whole victim mentality, and not in the sense of you're a victim, so you need to learn how to not be a victim. More on the lines of what I feel like. I feel as if that whole mentality, you're a victim, learn how not to be a victim, isn't the most terrible way to do it. It's definitely not the answer. It's not the most terrible way. But recently, we've had this thing in social media where it's like, you're the victim. It's time to wear a badge to show that you're the victim. And it's like, woe is me, instead of being proactive. And like you said, teaching the bullies not to bully rather than teaching the bullied to how to stop being bullied. And neither of those things are going to get you to where you want to be. I mean, in a society with like the military, predominantly male, and you got women who are serving that, like Senator Senator McSally getting raped or sexually assaulted. And
so when you were in the military, what things did they teach you about sexual assault?
So when I was in the military, we would have these meetings, like a huge meeting in a I guess a hall, you could say, and it would be about equal opportunity. It would be about no hazing. You know what hazing is, right? And it would, sometimes it'd be a lot of times it'd be about sexual assault, no drinking and driving. They're kind of like they're called safety stand downs. And there was an emphasis on it, but it wasn't. Granted, there actually were some people who actually started implementing these I guess slideshows, you can say, but being more proactive about, listen, this isn't. They were doing more of real life scenarios, because before it was just death by PowerPoint. Is what we'd call it, because people were just sitting there like, okay, we know, don't rape anybody. Yeah, that's a given. Like, those aren't things you should be like, oh damn, I didn't know I couldn't rape somebody. Like, that's not a thing that people...
See, but you think that way, and it's like, because we had the same slideshows too. I mean, in college, I was also a student ambassador. I had to show these videos to students coming in. So, and you will not believe how many girls would come up to me, freshman girls, and say, hey, has anything ever happened to you? And it's like, dang, your parents just dropped you off yesterday, and I just showed you this video on how not to get raped. And it's like, yeah, you're watching.
Oh, it's definitely a shock for people. It's
useful too, is what I'm saying. Like, to you, it might be like, oh my God, of course I shouldn't rape somebody. But this girl was probably coming from a place that maybe she didn't have to see those things.
I guess I should kind of, so what I mean when I say, people are like, oh, I definitely shouldn't rape.
Yeah.
I didn't mean it in the sense of like, oh, those are givens.
No, I know. I'm saying like for you specifically.
No, but I mean, when I was saying that more people are implementing better ways to teach people, what I was saying was, yeah, definitely don't rape somebody. That's a slide. Don't rape somebody. Don't sexually assault somebody. I got it. But when I went to, the further down in my career that I got in the Marine Corps, they were implementing different ways of showing it. So the one that I thought stood out to me really well was, they kind of had people like actors.
Oh, okay.
And they were acting out a scenario, and in the middle of a scenario, they'd show the wrong way. And then you see how it would get bad. And then they'd stop it, rewind, and then do the right way. And you're like, oh, that's a lot clearer, a lot better, because a lot of people, they get in those scenarios where somebody's drinking. Not to go off topic, but that's one of those things too, where it's like, now it's, if you're drunk, you can't consent. That's not, I get the sentiment behind it, depending on how drunk you are. But if you're both drunk, I mean, there's been multiple cases where a kid is like, I forget exactly what the case was, but the chick, she goes and tells her friend, I think I slept with this guy. I was super drunk. And they tell her, oh, you were drunk? He raped you. They were both drunk. They both, in a sense, consented. He didn't force himself upon her. She didn't force herself upon him. It was a mutual thing. But because she was drunk, all of a sudden he's a rapist. And they went through court and everything like that. And he at first got charged, but they rebutted and he got found not guilty. It's those things where we need a better way to teach people about these certain scenarios where it's like, if you're drunk, if you're too drunk, obviously it's not the easiest. It's not as black and white as saying, if you're drunk, don't consent or get out of that situation. But if you are and you make a mistake, mistakes are okay as long as you're not hurt. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it gets really down to those details. It gets real muddied up and there's no real definitive answer, you know?
Yeah. Going back to like Senator McSally as well, I was reading another reason that she wanted to go ahead and make this public, like her story, was because she hopes that in the military as well, there will be more programs where people will be like, hey, this is happening to your peers. You know, like you might think that we're implementing, and I'm putting my own words on this, but basically like you might think we're saying, hey, don't, you know, be aware of sexual assault, but it's because it's happening right next to you and you might not be aware. Does that make sense? So like
right.
she just wanted to give that voice so that these people understand, like, we need to do a better job. Like, yes, we're trying, but we need to do a better job of making sure that this is not happening to other women or men. There, you know, of course there's men that get sexually assaulted. And I'm sure it happens especially in the military as well. Yeah,
for sure. The numbers are completely lopsided as far as scenarios of that nature.
That's only because of the people that come forth.
Reporting and everything like that. No, I get it for sure. But even then, the amount of women that are, like, I'm not downplaying that at all, but I'm saying the numbers versus is definitely a lot bigger with women. Mm-hmm. Obviously, because you're in a male-dominant culture or society, kind of, you know. So it's those things that just kind of. I know you were telling me those different type of feminist groups you were in when you were in college.
They weren't feminist groups. It's a strong word.
Okay, see that word? See, there's
and I'm saying because it has a negative.
Right. So what would you call them?
They were just women empowerment groups.
Okay.
No, it was just meant to be a safe place, you know,
right.
for women to talk.
Well, I remember you, and now that we're talking about it, March, like, to me, I didn't know March was women, like a women's dominant month, you know, not dominant month, you know what I mean? Like, people were showing recognition to women until you were telling me about that one walk a mile in her shoes thing that you guys had for your school, and how many men attended that, walking in heels. Was it?
Yeah, a lot of the football players actually, not just football players, but just a lot of the guys that were well known on our campus actually took to the streets and walked in heels. And I thought it was amazing. To some of them, it may have been like a joke, like they're like, oh, this is funny, let's just do this. But they probably don't realize how much it meant to us, because when you have guys supporting you, your favorite word for men is calling women insane, right? So when you have men supporting you, it's like, hey, maybe I'm not that crazy to think that, you know, this is what we want and need.
Which is also a crazy thing, if you want to take that word specifically, that having those ideas for whatever time they were back then were just crazy. Like, what? You want to get a job? No, you already have a job. Your job is to take care of the kids while, you know, blah, blah, blah. But the more we have these women that speak out, women of history that actually try to make a difference and make change, the more you see, oh, that's not a crazy idea at all. It's just a human rights idea. Like, you're just being regular human. And that's with everything that but history has developed in a certain mindset, you know. And the more we progress, the more you can see those barriers being broken down, and the more you see people just being more open-minded to those ideas. And I think that's a great thing.
I think that's why the month is so important too, because there might be women who are like, oh, I want to be like a job that, like a construction worker, right? You know, that's not something that you would see a woman going to go do, probably because a lot of people just think she's small, she's not gonna be able to do a lot. We were talking about jobs the other day where it's like, you need to be able to lift 70 pounds. Like, I'm not gonna sign up for a job where you expect me to lift 70 pounds, not because I'm a woman, but I literally can't do that. And I think that's just it's just a way of saying, like, hey, if you're a woman, don't apply for this. That's how I feel about it. Not not
It's
putting
not
it,
the
not
intent-
saying
right, it's
anything
not the
to women who
intention.
can't, but that's what that screams